Good afternoon.
Hi, Carol.
Hello, Bill. My name is Carol McCoy. Today is March 27th, 28th, 2022. We are located at the Nashville Bar Association offices at 150 4th Avenue North, Suite 1350, Nashville, Tennessee. The interview is being conducted for the Legal History Project of the Nashville Bar Association. I have the pleasure of introducing Bill Leader. Would you please state your full name,
William Daniel Leader, Jr.,
date and place of birth?
Memphis, September 27, 1952.
Tell us about your grandparents and your parents, their names, if you know their birth dates, what they did.
Yeah, on my mother's side, my grandmother is Angelita Delgadillo Roberts. She is a native Nicaraguan and met my grandfather when he was working in Nicaragua. He was a physician. And they moved to Mississippi. And my mother was born in Mississippi or New Orleans, but she grew up half of her life in Nicaragua. And my dad's parents were born in Poland, and some of his siblings were born in Poland. They immigrated to the United States and settled in New York and changed their last name to Leader from Mazurkowitz.
And that was John and Sophia.
Yes,
And your grandfather's name was Curtis,
Curtis on my mother's side.
and he was a physician.
He was a family doctor.
And then your parents, their names,
Dorothy and Bill
and Dorothy was born,
in 1925.
I think you told me July 15th.
Yes,
Does that sound right? And your dad was born December 26th
26.
of 26.
Yes.
Tell me what your parents did.
My mom was a teacher in Hamilton County for almost 40 years. She retired.
What
And
grades?
middle school. She primarily social studies, and she loved it. She was a great teacher. She put her heart and soul into it. She just loved it.
And your dad?
He was in the insurance business for the longest time, and then he moved over to politics and spent the last half of his working life in various political campaigns and positions.
I think I recall you telling me that there was a time when your dad was in the Navy, like when you were born.
Yes, yeah, he was in the Korean War and was stationed on an aircraft carrier off the coast of Korea. They did airstrikes on Korea, and that's where he was when I was born.
Tell me about his involvement in politics.
Well, we started out, he was in the state legislature for 2 terms in the 60s. He resigned from that and ran for Congress unsuccessfully. This was in Chattanooga for the seat that Bill Brock held, who went on to be a U.S. Senator. And he was in various campaigns after that, mostly working with other candidates in their campaigns. He worked with Jane Eskin in her various campaigns for Public Service Commissioner or U.S. Senate. And he worked with Stan Snodgrass, who ran for governor, who a lot of people still remember.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Governor McWhorter.
And he worked in McWhorter's administration, not in his campaign.
What did he do in that administration? Who did he work for?
He worked with a gentleman named Bill Whitson, who was the Public Service Commissioner of General Services. General Services.
I think that's
Yeah.
what they call it today.
And he really liked Bill Whitson. Bill Whitson was a good guy.
Now, I know that you had a very idyllic childhood because you told me so.
Absolutely.
Would you tell us about your childhood, your home, your friends, recreation, travel? And I may interject here, but I want you to be able to have free reign.
I grew up on Signal Mountain, which is just outside of Chattanooga, and it was idyllic. It was like 1,500 people. We could do whatever we wanted to. Nobody worried about us. The parents and the families all kind of took care of each other. It was a great place to grow up. When I was in the sixth grade, our house burned and we got it pretty well gutted the house. And my mom and dad never really recovered from that financially or otherwise. It seems that after that point, I was raised by two strong women who really had an impact on me, my mom and my grandmother. And they taught me basic things that I needed to know. And I attribute any success I've had to those two and my wife, Melanie.
Where did you go to grade school?
I went to Signal Mountain Elementary School.
And then after the sixth grade and the house fire, where did you go?
I went to Baylor School. My grandmother paid for it. She thought I needed to go there.
Did you
And,
like it?
I liked it okay. It was very competitive, athletically and academically.
And who were your good friends during this time?
I had several good friends that lived on the mountain. Three people who I've stayed friends with all my life and stayed close to. Yeah.
And they are?
Ashley Shoemaker, Mike Yankee, and Raymond Prince.
I know
Right.
that you told me Ashley went to Knoxville
Yep, ended up in Knoxville. He did.
and Mike is in Corpus Christi,
Corpus
Texas.
Christi.
And I know Raymond Prince personally. He's a lawyer in
He
Nashville.
is.
All of them went to Baylor.
We did. We all went to the same church. We all grew up on the mountain and we all went to Baylor. And then we went our separate ways.
What were some of your activities when you had summers that you do then?
Yeah, I swam on a swim team, which it stayed with me all my life. I love to swim. Signal Mountain swim team, we were very competitive. We had a coach named Ray Buzzard who went and became the coach at UT Knoxville. He was a great swim coach. I'm fortunate to have him. And when I was old enough, I started a grass cutting business. And every summer I would cut grass on the mountain, cut people's lawns.
That was in high school? Or before?
Well, in junior high school,
Junior.
actually, and continued up through high school.
I think you said your family didn't have a lot of vacations, but there was a time when you took a memorable one to Florida.
Yeah, it was a big deal. I got to see the ocean for the first time. I thought that was pretty cool. Going to Florida in the 60s, you can imagine what it was like with the pink flamingos and all. That was we went to my grandmother's home every summer.
Where?
Her relatives in Mississippi. She had relatives.
Those
still
were the
there.
summer trips, right?
Yeah, that's right.
When you weren't working.
When I wasn't working.
You said that you cut grass. What were the other jobs that you had during the summer?
I did a construction job one summer,
Doing what?
digging footers, which are the bottom portion of a building.
It's
And
hard
you're
work.
down in the dirt and the mud and the sweat and the water.
And you
Yes.
had another summer job, which was,
I worked at a gas station one summer. Yeah,
and any carpet mills?
I worked at a carpet mill. It's good. You got a good memory.
I
That's
have good
right.
notes.
Yeah, yeah.
So what was your job at the carpet mill? I know about gas.
Yeah, pumping gas. Carpet mill carpets are made of thousands of threads, and they continuously go through what I'd call a loom to make a carpet. And we'd have to glue the loose ends of the thread because when a roll of carpet ran out, it had to continuously go to the next roll. So you're always gluing. And it's a tedious job, hot, noisy.
Tell me about these little animals that you raised.
Oh, my grandmother, she loved animals. And we raised peacock. I had 3 or 4 peacock at one time. They're quite noisy. They bothered the neighbors a lot. We raised ringneck pheasants. And I would hatch those myself. I had an incubator, and we would incubate the eggs. We put the eggs in there
And have
raise
babies.
and have a little baby pheasant. Yeah,
You didn't eat them, did you?
no, the cat got them one day.
Who was John Morgan? And what role did he play in your life?
John Morgan was a lawyer in Nashville, in Chattanooga. He was a trial lawyer. And he coached our swim team one year when Mr. Buzzard left. And I cut his grass too. And I just admired that man greatly. He did plaintiff's work like I do now. And he was the person who first got me interested and created a desire to be a lawyer. Somewhat,
How old?
gosh, I was probably in my teens when I first met him. And he took an interest in me, would ask me to come down to his firm and spend some time. And he was just a good man. Great lawyer. He died young.
What other influential people besides your mother and your grandmother and Melanie would you say played a role in how you developed as a child and as a young adult? John Morgan?
John Morgan did.
That's when
John Morgan did.
how did you decide where to go to college once you finished high school?
Well, I had a interest and a need for financial assistance. So, and I had an interest in the Navy. So I applied for and received a Navy ROTC scholarship. And those were great scholarships because they paid all your tuition. They paid your books. And we got the princely sum starting out at $50 a month. They increased it to $100 a month in my last year or so. And so everything was paid for with college, and it was great. And every summer, we would go on what's called a midshipman cruise. And the first summer, I went to Northern Europe. And
Baltic Sea?
yeah, and I was on an aircraft carrier, and we were bunked with the crew, and we did work that the crew did, and we got to see a lot. We got to go up near Russia. This was in the Cold War, and we'd get buzzed by Soviet bombers and Soviet planes every day. It was quite exciting.
And you are a freshman in high school, and this is your first summer.
Freshman in college.
Excuse me.
Freshman in college, and I went on another cruise after my third year in college, and that was to the Southern Pacific, and we went to Vietnam, and it was the tail end of the Vietnam War, and the president had just signed an agreement in the Paris peace talks whereby we were going to clean out all the mines out of Haiphong Harbor. And we were part of that detail. I mean, it was, we didn't get to go to port for 6 weeks, stayed out at sea, but it was an interesting experience.
During your years at Vanderbilt undergraduate, what was your major?
I had a double major. It was economics and political science. And so I had a major in one and a minor in the other, or maybe it was both a double major.
I think you said in your second summer in college that you did not
Go on a cruise.
go on the cruise.
Yeah.
What did you do?
I took calculus at UTC because I had to take it, and I just didn't want to take it at Vanderbilt. And I got an exemption to not go on a cruise that summer, and went to summer school.
How did you get your exemption?
I just asked for it. They let me do it. I said I would make it up next year, but they never made me make it up. So it was a good deal. Yeah.
Do you recall your favorite professors at Vanderbilt?
Yeah, I do. I liked a guy named Malcolm Getz, and he is still around, believe it or not. I talked to him about a year ago. And he had a course about cities. And he's quite the urban planner and an urban advocate. And he's continued that. I called him. He didn't remember me, but I remember him well.
And I think you said he wrote not only about urban planning, but also transportation,
He did.
which
He
is
did.
pretty critical.
Oh, he
in today's
did.
world.
Yeah. He had some opinions about the last transit plan that Metro put out there.
So who was Doug Wagner?
Doug Wagner was an economics professor, and he helped get me in law school because he wrote some nice recommendations for me. And I just kind of liked it. You know, it seems like the professors I like the best, I did the best in their class. It's funny
There's
how that works.
correlation there.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you come towards the end of your college career. You have a ROTC scholarship. What kind of commitment did you have?
I had 4 years of active duty at a minimum.
Tell me about that.
Well, that's interesting. I really wanted to fly in the Navy, but at the time, if you flew, you had to add 2 years onto your commitment. And do you know what it's like when you're a senior in college and you're thinking, like, I have to go in the service for 4 years because I really wanted to go to law school. And I knew then that I wanted to go to law school when I got out of the Navy. And if I flew, I would have it at a minimum 6-year commitment. So I went on a ship instead. And that was a 4-year commitment. I went on board a destroyer that was based in Mayport, Florida. And looking back on it, it was a great experience.
Now, I know that you married at some point. When did you and Melanie get married?
Melanie and I got married in 1986, November 22, 1986.
And when did you start your career in the Navy?
1974. Yeah, and as soon as I graduated from college, and I had 4 years, the day I got out of the Navy, the next day after I got out of the Navy, I started law school. So I didn't have much of a break.
So you're commissioned as an ensign on
Yep.
this destroyer in Mayport.
Right.
And what was your assignment?
Well, at first I was a gunnery officer. We had 2 guns on the ship, and I was in charge of the men that manned the guns. And I changed jobs. Then I became what's called the first lieutenant on the ship. And those are all the line handlers and the people who keep up the outside of the ship. And I really learned a lot from that because these were the guys who sometimes didn't make it in some of the technical ratings or gotten in trouble or busted or just couldn't qualify for the technical ratings. And I learned so much about people and was exposed. I mean, Navy's very diverse. Back then, everybody, it was colorblind, but there was such diversity in the Navy. It was quite an experience.
Your term was opened your eyes to diversity.
Yep.
Because of the variety of backgrounds
That's right.
and individuals represented in your, I guess, your workforce.
Yeah, yeah.
You did that for 3 years.
I did that for 3 years on the ship. Yep.
Now, you talked about some of the places you went to while you were in the Navy.
Mhm.
I know where you went during the summers you were in college. Where did you go when you were assigned full time?
On active duty, we would go, I've been down to the Caribbean about 3 times. And we'd make stops in St. Thomas, Puerto Rico. We went to Trinidad and Tobago once, which is just north of Venezuela. That's probably
Does the
it.
Navy have ports in all these places? Are there American ports or are you staying at ports of other countries?
Well, you know, Puerto Rico is almost like a state,
Yes,
so
it
it's,
is.
and the Virgin Islands are just,
The territories of the
They're
United
ter-
States,
yeah,
but
they
Trinidad and Tobago.
that's a separate country, but we were welcome there. Yeah, I mean, the US Navy was welcome there, and some places it's not, but in most places it is.
Well, you also mentioned the Mediterranean.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Went on a cruise over there, and
Now, when you
We-
say a cruise, I think the Navy uses that term differently than people who go on cruises.
yeah, we do. Yeah, I mean, this would be like a 6.5 or 7 month trip where you'd leave and you'd go with a bunch of other ships, and you'd work with NATO. That's very relevant now. You know, you work with other NATO countries and do exercises.
Tell me some of those exercises that you did.
Well, one of the things we did was, people may not remember this as much, but in 76, Lebanon had a big civil war. I mean, it was terrible. That country was just falling apart. And so we went over to Lebanon and just were over there in case we were ever needed, in case Americans needed to be evacuated, or in case anything went haywire. But most of what we did was we tracked Soviet submarines, and that was our mission. And we had special equipment called sonar, a special kind of sonar and electronic equipment that would allow us to track Soviet subs, or enhance our ability to track Soviet subs and communicate with other Navy units like aircraft and other ships in updating our progress in the location of these Soviet submarines.
When you say you're using sonar to track these Soviet submarines, was this in the Mediterranean? Or,
This was in the Mediterranean and in the Atlantic.
and how
yeah.
many were there?
Soviet subs, they were all over the place. There were quite a few.
Do we, United States, have a lot of submarines going around the world like that too?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do.
And they track us?
And they track us, yes. And we track them. And the whole goal was, is if war broke out, we'd be the first one to attack a Soviet submarine.
What did you do in your 4th year of your commitment?
I got a great job. I got sent back to Nashville to work at the Navy recruiting district.
How did you manage that?
I asked for it, and for some reason they gave it to me. I knew I was going to start law school, and I wanted to start law school at Vanderbilt. And I thought I'd be best positioned to get into Vanderbilt and start law school if I were here. So I was due to rotate off the ship after 3 years on the ship, and they sent me to Nashville. And so I was stationed here in shore duty for close to a year.
And you started law school in 74.
In 78. In
78, excuse me.
yeah, in 1978. I was in the class of 81.
Did you have any trouble taking the LSAT?
Well, yeah, I did. I took it in undergrad school and I thought, okay. And so then by the time I got ready to apply to law school, gosh, everybody wanted to go to law school. And the competition had increased so much, and the average LSAT grades had gone up. Grade point averages had gone up. And I thought, well, this is going to be tricky. So I took it again. And I don't really even remember my score, but somehow, some way, I managed to get into Vanderbilt Law School.
Now,
And,
while Vanderbilt was your choice of law school, were there any others that you considered?
oh, yeah. Yeah. I applied to a bunch of law schools, but I really wanted to stay in Tennessee. And if I were going to stay in Tennessee, I wanted to stay in Nashville. And so Vanderbilt is where I wanted to go.
You come back now to start law school in 1978. You've been in the military for 4 years.
Right.
And one of the things that they have suggested I ask is the impact of the events that were happening during the time that you're in college the time that you're in the military and then in law school. And I think you focused on two of them.
Yeah, in college, that was at the end of the Vietnam War. And the military was taking a big hit. And it's not, today, that people put yellow ribbons on the back of their SUVs and say, I support the troops. And that was not happening back then. I mean, in ROTC, we were heckled, and I get it. And the military took the brunt for the decisions that were made in the Vietnam War. And we were not popular in college and when I was on active duty. It's not like it is today at all. When we came back, we weren't greeted as heroes or revered as the people are today. And I'm glad to see that.
I think you also had an observation about Selma and growing up in Chattanooga. And
Yep,
that experience. Richard Dinkins is a friend of yours,
he is.
and he is
Yes,
a retiring appellate judge.
he is.
What is your recollection of that environment?
Well, growing up in Chattanooga, I grew up in the 60s, during Selma, Birmingham, Chattanooga. These were the times of the sit-ins, the lunch counter sit-ins, the bus sit-ins, and it was a fraught time. Chattanooga had violence in Chattanooga. There were a lot of sit-in protesters who were jailed, beat up, and that was the time of Selma too. And I remember hearing it. I knew that there was a lot of discord. I knew there was a lot of fuss. Unfortunately, where I lived, I wasn't exposed to many African Americans growing up. And it wasn't until I was in the Navy and saw just, it really opened my eyes to the world. I knew about it, but it wasn't, I didn't experience, not like the way I do now. And in the Navy and afterwards, I've developed late, probably friends with African Americans and have heard their stories. And it's, we've done an injustice, and it is the original sin of this country. Slavery.
I want to return now to law school. I wanted to get that flavor of what was happening while you're growing up. But we're back in law school. You had an uncle who was a lawyer?
I did, yes.
And what influence did he, you said that he was a
Yeah.
spy.
Yeah, he wasn't a practicing lawyer. He was in World War II and went to Georgetown Law School and got recruited out of Georgetown to join the CIA. The thing is, though, he couldn't tell, even his family, that he worked for the CIA. They all thought he worked for the State Department. And so they'd go overseas and he'd have these overseas assignments. And he'd be working out of an embassy. But he was actually working for the CIA, and he was an agent. And I never realized any of this until I was an adult, and he could talk about it. But there's several articles written about him, about how he was a really good spy.
And what was his name?
John Leader. I've named one of my sons after him. Great, great name. He had a big influence on me.
Do you recall your favorite courses in law school?
I like civil procedure a lot. I like torts. I'm sorry.
With who?
Don Payne taught us civil procedure.
That's hard because I thought he taught at the University of Tennessee.
He did. but he came down. I don't know how he did it. Well, I know how he did it. And Vanderbilt asked him to come down, and he would come down one night a week on Wednesday night, and we'd have a marathon session. And it just seemed like that. It just was the quickest class. And I thought he was the greatest teacher. And oftentimes we'd go out with him after class and go to a local bar or go to somebody's house
And chat.
and chat. Yeah.
The other courses that you liked?
I like torts. I did. I took mostly the business-oriented courses. I took every tax course I could take. I took the hard tax course, the Fed tax course, just because I wanted to get exposed to that, even though I never thought I would be using it in my legal career.
Did you find that that was true?
That is true. I don't know tax at all. But I thought it was interesting to be exposed to it. I just wanted to get some exposure to those type of things.
And evidence?
I liked evidence. I'm trying to remember who my teacher was, though, and I can't right now. But I did like evidence.
You said that there was Professor Calvani,
Yep, he was there.
and was he the dean at that time?
Oh, no, he was a contracts professor. Calvani was. Dean Canals was the dean of the law school. I can't remember his first name, but he had a wife who was a law student. And Deb Bostic was the assistant dean. You may remember him.
I do. He recruited me.
Yeah.
While you are in law school, that very first year, you had an opportunity to do some work
I did.
for a law firm. Which
I
firm was
did.
that?
It was Watkins, McGugin, McNeilly, and Rowan.
And
No.
what job did you have?
Well, anything they wanted me to do. Anything. I got every day, whatever needed to be filed, I'd file it. This was, of course, before electronic filing. This was before fax machines. This was before email.
So what was
So-
filing like before we had these?
Oh, it was great. You'd walk over to the clerk's office and you'd go chat with the clerks. And I remember them well, or you go to the clerk and master's office and chat with them, and you'd file it, and they'd give you a stamp filed copy. And sometimes I'd look things up, or I'd pay receipts
When
and
you say you look things up, what type of books were you looking into or records were you looking into?
well, you'd have a docket number or the name of a party. There was no computer back then. And you'd go just look in these big, huge docket books,
Huge docket
huge.
books.
And then they could pull a paper file for you if you wanted to look at it.
And this is in 1978 when you started.
1978, yep.
How did you find this position at McGugin?
Well, David Steed worked there, and he was in law school a year ahead of me. And he worked there, and he wanted to recruit me because he didn't like doing all the scut work. And if he knew if he got somebody else there, then he'd be relieved of that. And so I did it.
Okay. Who were some of the friends that you made in law school?
Well, probably my closest friend in law school was Sam Lipshy. And Sam and I hit it off. I was a little older, and Sam was a little bit older too, but not as older as I was, not as old as I was. I like Sam, and we hung around quite a bit, especially after our first year.
Where is
Spent a
he
lot of
now?
time. He's at the same firm he started at. Used to be Boult, Cummings, Connors, and Berry, and now it's Bradley Arand.
And do you see him very often?
I talk to him a lot. I text him a lot. Email him. Don't see him as much. COVID has kind of shut some of that down.
What type of activities did you have in law school other than just studying
Well,
and working?
I studied. We had some pretty good law school parties. I had, hung around. Ann Davis was a pretty good friend of mine in law school, especially towards the end. She's still here. And her husband, Carl, is here.
Carl Dean
Yeah, Carl
was the
Dean.
mayor.
That's right.
All right.
They were in my class. We had some prominent people in my class. Turned out to be that way anyway.
When you were at McGugin each year that you worked all 3 years there,
I did.
and did the job assignments improve
Well, I did more research. I did more working on actual cases,
rather than just filing?
but I still filed up until the time I became a lawyer. And even afterwards, I still filed stuff.
And who did you report to?
Oh, the lawyer that I was working with. I'd worked with John Brandon or Rowan McNeilly, sometimes George McGugin, Dan Loftus. Yep. Yeah. Back then, Bill Sutherland, he was a lawyer.
He was.
Yeah.
How
John
did
Van
you,
Cleve.
who?
John
John
Van
Van
Cleve.
Cleve.
Yep.
All of those, I think, are members or former members of the National Bar Association.
Yep. Ben
And did-
Rowan.
And did that encourage you to become a member in the Bar
I
Association?
think so. Yeah. Yeah, they encouraged me to, and I've been a member ever since I've been licensed.
As you get to the end of law school, how did you assess the value of its curriculum and what it provided?
Oh, boy. At the time, first year, they scare you to death and work you to death. Second year, you work pretty hard. And by the third year, you're not doing much in law school. I mean, you're taking courses and trying to get your credits. You're supposed to branch out into things you like. I think Vanderbilt did a good job of teaching me the basics of law, tort law, contract law, evidence law. It taught me enough to pass the bar, but you really learn to practice law by working with a mentor and working with other lawyers and just doing it. Sometimes I think you don't really learn that much in law school looking back on it, although at the time it's very daunting.
Now, I did reference Melanie White, who you married in 1986. That's 3 years after you finished law school, right?
Yes.
Right. I didn't ask you, however, about your brothers and sisters. I
Yep.
think you have 2 sisters.
I do.
And who are they?
Dorothy, who lives in Chattanooga. She was a school teacher. She had a career as a school teacher and she's now retired. And Anne, my younger sister, who lives in Des Moines, Iowa.
Were you the middle child?
I was the middle, beat up by the girls.
And your sister in Des
Rightfully
Moines,
so.
is she still working for Nationwide?
Yep, she works for an insurance company.
Tell me just a teeny bit about Melanie.
She's the best thing that ever happened. She really is. She's
How did you meet her?
just through a mutual friend at a party. It was a setup thing.
That was right at the end of,
That was in 83.
So
It was in 1983.
is that when you finished law school?
81, it was just a couple of years after, a year and a half after I was out of law school.
And what is her full name?
Melanie Mitchum Leader.
And do you all have children?
We have 3 children,
And they are
Daniel, John, and Elizabeth.
Daniel, born in 89. And what
Yes.
is he doing?
He is a engineer. He's a graduate school engineer. He works at a consulting engineering firm in Rochester, New York.
John?
John is in Montana. He's had a career with the Forestry Service, but he just left. And he's going to find something else to do, but he's going to stay in Montana.
You get tired of trees?
I don't think he got tired of trees. I think he got tired of working for the
I
government.
understand that. And then your
I think
daughter,
that's-
Elizabeth,
She lives in New York City. And she was just home for a week for Melanie's birthday. Came to see her, spent an entire week with her. And she works for a consulting firm in healthcare.
how does she like you?
She loves it.
You don't have any grandchildren at this
No,
point, right?
no.
Are there any potential lawyers in your family?
potential. It's possible, but I don't think anybody's going to go to law school.
Now, you finish law school, you've been working as a clerk for the McGugin, Watkins, McGugin law firm. What do you plan to do with regards to the bar exam and your job search?
Well, I just floated into working with them after I got out of law school. They made me an offer and they made it clear I could work there. And I liked the people and I liked litigation. That's what I wanted to do. And they are mostly a defense firm and they took me in and I got to work on some great cases and really enjoyed the experience. And I stayed there for 4 years. And I left not because of the people who I really liked, but rather I just didn't like doing defense work. It just wasn't my cup of tea. And so
What was it that you didn't like about defense work?
I didn't like the control and having to report to an insurance company. And I didn't like just my tendency is to do plaintiff's work. And I got to do some plaintiff's cases while I was there, and I really enjoyed them. Some injury cases, some commercial fraud cases, and I just like being on that side of the case where I'm prosecuting something where I think my client's been wronged, to try and do something for somebody instead of being a defendant.
So at the end of 4 years, what transition did you make?
I went to Boult, Cummings, Connors and Berry.
How did that get arranged?
Well, I knew Sam, I knew John Day, I knew there was another guy from my class there, and I knew a lot of the lawyers there. We were in the same building, and so I'd hang around with them a lot after hours. I'd go up there and just hang around with them, got to know them. Enough of them could tolerate me so that they took me over there. And I went to work in their litigation section. And it was a great experience. Well, I got to eventually work with John Connors.
Tell us a little bit about John Connors for those in the TV viewing area, who he was and what he was like.
He was a great man. He was a great mentor, and he was a great lawyer. He was a great role model. He had three things that he cherished in life, and that was his God, and his family, and his profession. And he was the consummate professional. He was a plaintiff's lawyer, ended up being a plaintiff's lawyer, doing malpractice, medical malpractice mostly, and catastrophic personal injury. Great role model. Very patient man. Was the most open-minded person, one of the most open-minded people I've ever known. And especially when you consider when I was working with him, he was in his late 60s, 70s, and 80s. Very open-minded. Very curious. I had a lot of respect for him, and he was didn't give out compliments. He had an ability to make me, at least, do my best always. Just try as hard as I could to make sure I met his standards. Rarely, if ever, I can't remember him ever complimenting me, but just that he tolerated me and let me work with him was enough for me to keep me motivated.
How did he mentor you?
By example, mostly. But if you ever ask him a question, he'd take the time to answer and tell you his reasons why. But mostly, he mentored me by example. And I could recognize, even I could, his standards and his desire to do his very best for his client, always. That's what mattered. It wasn't money. It wasn't fame or glory. It was, let's do the best we can for this client. And that rubbed off. I mean, it's great to have a mentor.
I think he gave you direction or suggestions about what to do and what not to do.
He did.
What
He
would
did.
some of those be?
Well, sometimes he'd say, I'm just trying to think of an example. Oh, specific examples?
If you
Bill, if somebody writes you a letter, don't ever make that an exhibit in court. Don't do it. Don't ever put in an affidavit what some other lawyer said. Just don't do it. If some lawyer says something that puts them in a bad light, that's fine. Just don't throw it back in your face. I've tried to remember that. He'd say, we're in an adverse situation with other lawyers. People throw a lot of sharp elbows, but let's just try and get over it and forget it. You might take offense at something, but don't hold a grudge against people.
When you first started out, either you told us a little bit about Watkins McGugin. What were some of the first cases that you had at the Boult firm?
A few commercial cases. There was a big bank case you can relate to, maybe with the FDIC. Boult Cummings was a commercial law firm. And so I'd work on some commercial cases with them. A failed bank rubbing up against the FDIC and wants to collect their assets. I can remember doing that. No relation to anybody on that bank, obviously. It was an out-of-town bank. But mostly, Carol, what I did was I got to work with John Connors. And that's what I remember the most is
What type of cases were those?
medical malpractice and catastrophic personal injury cases for the most part.
People seriously hurt,
People seriously.
either because of malpractice or accidents.
Yes.
And do any of those, the first two or three that you were involved in, stand out in your mind?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What would that be?
Oh, one case, we represented a young woman who had a baby. She had had some post-delivery complications that were not handled appropriately by her physician in the hospital. And she ended up with just serious brain damage. And that was probably the first big malpractice case that Mr. Connors let me work with him on. And he let me take most of the depositions. In fact, I think I took them all or defend them all when they were taken. I was really just didn't know what I was doing.
Did
But-
that case go to trial?
It settled before trial, shortly before trial.
And how did that affect your client?
Well, she was taken care of for the rest of her life, financially.
And the family was satisfied? in
I
that
think they
regard?
were. I think they were. Her daughter, I still communicate with her daughter. Her daughter was just a baby then, but her daughter reached out to me about 10 years ago and wanted some information about her mom that she didn't have. And I've kept up with her since.
The area of medical malpractice developed, and it sounds as though you were right in the middle of it when it was developed. At the
I don't know if I was in the middle of it. I was watching it develop. There's a lot of other great lawyers that were here in town as well. Randy Kennard being one of them, who maybe developed it more than anybody else. I don't want to take any credit for that, but I have watched it change and have been affected by it for sure.
I want to come back to that in a minute. What were your work habits through Watkins, McGugin, and then into the Boult firm?
Well, my grandmother always told me, if you work hard, do the right thing, things will work out. Well, I've always tried to work hard, and I haven't been always successful at doing the right things, but I've always tried to work hard. And so I've always worked hard. And my work habits have been intense and long hours. And maybe that's one reason why my children would never consider being a lawyer. But
No, I'm talking about the long hours and how hard it is, I think is an appropriate observation to make when we're talking about how someone establishes themselves in the profession. At that time, what kind of professional affiliations did you have?
you mean outside of the firm?
Yes.
Oh, of course, NBA, the TBA, we called it ATLA back then, American Trial Lawyers Association, Tennessee Trial Lawyers Association. I'm still members of all those, although they're called something else.
Were you involved in any political events during that time?
Not other than an interested observer and reader, not directly involved in any campaigns.
Did you take time out for lunch?
Most of the time. Not so much now, I don't. But yeah, back then, I mean, we'd go out to eat lunch a lot. Our friends and I. And it was an event. Downtown Nashville was much different then.
In what way?
There were people all around. We had these banks that were headquartered. You had Nashville City Bank, back in Nashville, First American Bank, Third National Bank, Commerce Union. They were all headquartered right here in Nashville. And their offices were all downtown. And they had and lawyers were all downtown. Law firms were all downtown. And you'd have booming lunch business downtown. You'd have people walking around on the streets downtown. What was that deli up by the Hermitage Hotel? The great deli.
Satsuma.
No, it's not Satsuma. I'm just trying to think of the name of it. I want to say Zagers or something like that.
Zagers is right.
Yeah. People have a great big lunch business. Satsuma would have a big lunch. And so you can just walk around downtown and see people you work with, see people you know, friends. It was much different being downtown then. What was your question, Carol? I got off.
Well, it was about lunch and
Yeah,
what
yeah,
happens.
Yeah, you go to lunch. Yeah,
So it's a different experience today.
it is. It
In-
is much different.
In today's world, what is the lunch experience to your observation?
Well, I don't eat much lunch, and I usually don't go out for lunch. I don't, unless I'm meeting somebody. And with COVID, that's been fairly rare. But I think people stay in. They don't go out like they used to.
You had mentioned John Connors as having a strong influence on your early career. Were there
He did.
any other people or events that had a big influence on your career?
My wife, Melanie, has had the biggest influence.
How would you describe that influence? I understand about John Connors. He is more of a mentor.
Melanie has supported me in everything I wanted to do. Has encouraged me in everything I wanted to do. And when I've had failures, or things haven't turned out right, she's been so supportive of me. Never critical. She probably should be. She probably should be more. But she's just a perfect partner.
That's a
And,
wonderful compliment.
Yeah.
A good observation. What were the other lawyers? Who were the other lawyers or business people, colleagues that had an influence on you? Not necessarily people in your law firm. And you mentioned a few. like Doug Fisher or
Yeah.
Jack Butler?
Yeah, I like, yeah, Doug Fisher, Bill Feynman. Bill Feynman was a judge the whole time, but there's some people who stand out, who taught you a lot. Doug Fisher was one of them.
He would have been defense oriented.
He was very defense oriented.
And was he ever on the other side of lawsuits?
Yes,
And how would you have learned from him?
consummate gentleman, just like I said about John Cummings. Just an unflappable gentleman. Nice to me. He knew that, he didn't treat me like a young lawyer. He treated me with respect, and that's something you always remember.
As a peer.
Yeah, he did, and I was no peer of his.
You mentioned Jack Butler.
Jack Butler was a good guy. He was a good guy. I liked Jack. Liked his dad too. There were some real lions in the bar. There was John Toon. Just great men. Back then, they were all men for the most part, and now that's not the case anymore. Thank goodness. Judges, I've learned a lot from.
What would you say were some of the judges that you learned?
Well, I'd like to keep it to judges who are no longer with us. Joe Loser, Jimmy Swigert, Denmark Bell. Those judges really taught me a lot. They were good judges. Not always so nice, but I learned a lot from them.
When you say that you learned a lot from somebody like a Joe Loster or a Denmark Bell, what do you learn from a judge that you don't learn from a mentor or a colleague?
Well, when you're with a judge, it's a different relationship. That in my view, a judge is pretty much like the captain of the ship, their guy in their courtroom. And so you've got to do what they say, and you can push back if you disagree, but the office commands respect and loyalty. I thought Joe Loser just was, despite his gruff manners sometimes, I just thought he was eminently fair and ruled correctly, or at least what he thought was correctly, no matter what kind of case it was. I mean, and no matter whether it was a big case or a little case, whether you were a plaintiff or a defendant. I thought he ruled well, and he was very experienced. Denmark Bell was such a nice man to everybody, every litigant, every lawyer, just always nice. But he'd rule firmly, and when he once finally ruled, that was it.
He was in Williamson County.
He was in Williamson County.
And then Judge Swigert, you mentioned.
Yep, he had a nice demeanor, a kind of a wry sense of humor, that Cheshire cat grin that he had. I remember he had a rule, and that was when you appeared before him, the first thing you had to do was say, "Your Honor, I'm Bill Leader. I represent the plaintiff." And I remember one time Tom Schreiber was in his courtroom. I can't recall what he was there for, but it was on a motion day. And, you got the whole courtroom full of people. And General Schreiber gets up there to present whatever it is he's presenting, and he starts talking about it. And Judge Swigert says, "I'm sorry." And General Schreiber stops and he says, you left something out. And Tom Schreiber shakes his head. "Well, what are you talking about?" And it finally comes out. He says, "You didn't tell me your name." And he says, "What do you mean?" He says, Judge Swigert says, just deadpan serious, "You never told me your name." And he says, "Well, you know who I am." And he says, "You never told me your name." And finally he says, "Well, I'm General Schreiber, Thomas Schreiber." So he was a nice guy. All of us have our quirks, and he, of course, had his, just like all of us.
How would you describe the surrounding community at the time? We have had that question come up, and it's your observations of what the community, the legal community was like at that time.
Yeah, I was at the start of a big change. And that is, back then, it was mostly male dominated, especially in litigation. There were just a few female litigators, and I don't think we had any female judges. But now there's been a sea change, and it's been gradual, but it's taken hold. And now so many of the trial lawyers are female. So many judges are female, including on the Supreme Court, especially. Well, we've got 3 now.
Of 5.
Pardon?
Of 5 people.
3 to 5. And just on a more global nature, Ketanji Brown Jackson looks like she's going to be on the Supreme Court. And there couldn't be a more classy, qualified justice on that court. And I was so proud to see her last week sitting up there, so composed, so judicious. If anybody had any doubts about her capabilities as a judge, any objective, those should be erased.
I believe you were. You also mentioned, as far as the community, what it was like about knowing the number of lawyers in the legal community.
Oh, yeah.
And
I knew most of all the lawyers. And maybe it was because I was a little bit younger and you'd look up to the people who were older than you. But we knew, I mean, I thought I knew either by face or name, by name, most every lawyer, and by face, every lawyer.
and their reputation.
And their reputation. And now I just don't know many lawyers at all. It seems like there's so many new lawyers. And I think the number of lawyers has grown. As I said, I think it's a positive. We've got much more diversity now, both on the judicial side and on the lawyer side.
Technology's had its impact, as you noted, because people now are not going over to file motions.
Right.
And you commented on how that has changed, one, getting to know the other lawyers and being able to observe. What have you observed?
We don't talk to each other as much. We don't pick up the phone and call each other.
How has that
It's good.
impacted the work that you do or the work experience?
I think in some ways, email is a boon. It's good. You know, this confirms we're going to meet next week at 6, or we're going to talk at 4, or something like that. Or here's the document, you know, with my changes. But trying to work anything out, any kind of dispute, especially if you're angry with somebody or upset, talking to them is the best thing. And I've been guilty of not doing that. But we need to talk to each other because we seem to get kind of bold. Some of us do from time to time behind a keyboard. And we would type out things that we'd never, ever say to anybody. You've seen it. I've seen it. I've done it. And it's not good because you put something in writing and it never goes away. And it stays there. And if somebody doesn't like it, they keep picking it up and looking. Whereas if I talk to you on the phone, we're not going to be disagreeable or a lot less likely. That's changed.
And mediation.
Mediation has changed things. And God bless, there's a great mediators. We have some wonderful mediators. And they've done jobs. They've gotten some cases resolved that I never thought would have gotten resolved. But I think too many times the knee-jerk reaction of a lawyer is to say, let's go to mediation. Well, why don't we sit down and try and work it out? Look, Carol, I think this is what I think about my case. This is what I think it's worth. Let's see if we can meet a middle ground. And there's lawyers who still do that. And I like that system best. Mediation's not bad. And mediation has its place and its purpose. But too many times we just default to mediation. And I think we need to talk to each other.
What has been lost because we now have motion dockets that are so short or limited?
Mhm.
What do you feel has been lost in that regard?
Yeah, I used to, sometimes I thought, well, we'd be better off having motions decided on the papers, like they do in federal court. And with COVID, motions went away. And as a result, you don't see other lawyers as much, because at least if you went there for a motion docket, you'd see other lawyers and you could talk to them. You could talk to them about your case. You could see what they're doing. And, you know, it's interesting to go over there and listen to motions. And we've lost a lot of that now because motions are not getting argued. Now, I'm all for sometimes having motions heard just on the papers, you know, having a judge decide them on the papers, but we don't get over there as much as we used to. Don't know why.
How can you observe a good lawyer?
You can go watch them try a case, or you can watch them argue a motion. And I've really learned a lot just by watching lawyers argue motions or try cases. And when they're not trying cases, you can't watch that.
And in today's world, how do you know when there's going to be a trial that you might want to watch?
Well, that's a good question. You know, if you go over, you know, we used to have motions and you'd kind of have an eye on what's going on. Well, it used to be you could go over there and there'd be cases being tried during the jury week, you know, in 2 or 3 courtrooms at the same time. That's just not happening as much anymore. I can't explain why. I think that mediation has taken care of a lot of cases. And obviously COVID stopped a lot of trials.
You were at the Boult firm for a number of years.
Over 20 years.
And how did the practice change while you were there?
At that firm?
Yes, sir.
It was an excellent firm. It was a corporate firm. It became much more, it grew exponentially. Its healthcare practice grew by leaps and bounds, where now it's one of the leading healthcare firms, law firms in the region, if not in the country. And it made it very hard for me to do what I want to do.
Plaintiffs.
Yeah, plaintiffs' healthcare work. Yeah, it did.
What happened as a result of that?
I left.
And where did you go?
I just started my own firm. I did.
When did you do that?
In 2005.
And are you now still in that same firm?
Essentially, it's still me.
And how, in the last 17 years, if you left in 2005, and this
Right.
is 2022, how has the practice of plaintiffs, personal injury, medical mal changed?
Medical mal has changed in this respect. We've got a bunch of new rules. In 2011, the legislature passed what I call tort reform. And we already had, Tennessee's never been a wild runaway jury state. It's very conservative. It was conservative before 2011. But the legislature established the thing that's hurt medical malpractice the most, in my view, from the plaintiff's view, from the victim's view, are these damage caps. There's a $750,000 cap on non-economic damages. And if you have a young mother who is perhaps killed, or a young dad without much earnings history, that may be all you get. Even though maybe you have kids, maybe you have a surviving spouse. That's the cap on non-economic damages. And it makes the cases considerably harder to resolve because the defense can just say, well, we know what our ceiling is. We know how much we can get hit for if there's an adverse judgment. Let's just wait it out. And if we're going to settle it, we'll settle it right before trial. And it's made resolving those cases much harder. The damage caps have just changed the entire complexion. And it's also the same on catastrophic personal injury cases. It has changed the dynamic.
What do you foresee happening as a result of the caps on damages? Will it change? Will it stay in effect?
Not in our lifetime, I predict. Not unless there's a sea change in the legislature. I don't see it changing. I look around at our border states. Kentucky doesn't have caps on damages. And you look at some of the judgments coming out of there. You look around the country and you look at the judgments. We've got another rule that's very restrictive, and that is in a medical malpractice context, unless we get a waiver from the court, we can only use expert witnesses from Tennessee or the surrounding states, the states that touch Tennessee. So we can't, for example, use an expert from New York or Massachusetts or California or even Florida. And Nashville fashions itself as the healthcare capital of the world. And that law that limits our use of experts was passed back in the 70s when the legislature thought we had a malpractice crisis. But that's passed. And it makes it very tough to prosecute these cases. What do I see happening?
Yes.
I don't see young lawyers. I can understand why young lawyers don't want to do medical malpractice on the plaintiff's side, and why it's very hard, it's difficult to do, it's expensive, and the rewards are not. The rewards of helping somebody out are still there. They'll always be there, but the financial rewards have been capped. No pun intended.
When you started in 2005, the small firm, how did your work habits change from what you were doing at Boult to being in your own?
It's gotten a lot harder. It's gotten a lot harder because I've had partners since I've been out, some really good partners, but it's all on me, both running the firm and generate the income. And I thought I worked hard before, but I work too hard now. I still work terrible hours.
Are there any tips that you have that you made for yourself? I think you said sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night, notes to self.
Yep.
Have they been beneficial?
Not waking up in the middle of the night. Notes to self. Yeah, they do.
And the use of computers, reviewing what you have done, how has that helped you?
Oh, it's helped a lot. It evens the playing field between small firm and big firm. We can do all the same legal research. We have listservs among malpractice lawyers, among plaintiffs lawyers, and you can share ideas. You can run ideas by other people in another state. You can detect trends, just new ways to do things. There's more corroboration among lawyers on national scale because of electronics and because of email and because of listservs. That's all new in the last, it's caught on in the last 15 years. That's been very helpful. We can find out about experts. You know, you can put out a query. Other sides calling Dr. Joe Smith, who's a neurologist. Does anybody have any testimony? You can find stuff on people.
Do you now find that because of the caps, because of this restriction on experts in medical mal, that you take cases from other states or associate with lawyers in other states?
I've just stuck to Tennessee. I've got, it's hard enough to just keep up with Tennessee.
What type of involvement have you had with the local bar and the local bench?
You mean in?
Volunteer work or
Not
serving?
enough. Not enough. I did a lot more when I was younger.
Well, let's talk about what you did when you were younger. What did you
Yeah,
do?
I was on a TBA committee, a bench bar relations committee. Tom Gray was the head of it. I liked him and I got to work with him for about 3 years. I really enjoyed it. And I've enjoyed, I've been on various Nashville Bar Association committees. Circuit Court Committee, the Federal Court Committee, pro bono. And I've enjoyed it when you give back. I think it's great, but I haven't done enough of it, especially since I've opened this firm. I've poured all of my energy and all of my time into it.
Do you see this ever changing? That you might become more
With
involved
me?
with the committees or the bar?
Oh, it should.
Well, I'll solicit you to do that.
Okay, thanks. I'll take you up on it.
I think
Thank you.
that you have a lot to offer them. Just as you were talking about John Connors, there are other lawyers who could benefit by what you have experienced and your observations and your professionalism.
I got the pro bono award 1 year, in fact, from the Nashville Bar Association. I enjoyed doing that.
Do you do any pro bono now?
As a plaintiff's lawyer, of course.
That goes without saying.
Yeah, I do. People, I can name people now. I mean, are they indigent people? I don't. I used to take cases to the NBA pro bono. I'll do things for people all the time and don't charge. Just.
Have you had any experience or involvement in local, state, or national politics?
Well, through my dad, I had too much through local and state politics. But no, not other than being a very interested viewer and reader and consumer of information about politics.
I think you had indicated that you helped your dad a lot when he was running.
Yeah, I did.
You would have been young,
I would have been very young.
but that your opinion of politics changed.
Yeah, it's a dirty business in my view. On the legislative side, on the legislative side and on the executive side, there's a lot of politics. And I'm not saying this because you're a former judge. I think that the judicial side is the last true independent branch of government, most free from politics, most free from money and outside influences. I think that's the case here in Tennessee, on the state level.
What do you think are some of the major influences that happened in society during your years as a practitioner? We talked about your younger years, the Vietnam War, the civil rights. What are you going to say impacted society during the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the aughts?
Me too. Civil rights continues. equality. We need to treat people equal. And I think it's just brought out. And you look at George Floyd, you look at Harvey Weinstein, the Me Too movement. We need to treat everybody equally, irrespective of their.
Do you see that having an impact on the younger lawyers? Some of these events impacting them in a positive or negative way?
I've seen both.
How so?
Well, I've seen people condemn Black Lives Matter, Me Too. But overwhelmingly, people really believe that's the case. That we don't treat people equal in our society. And there's a lot of good policemen, but George Floyd is an example of what can go wrong. And there's been other examples too.
Do you think that the generation of the 20s and the 30s are taking those experiences and embracing them in a positive way or rejecting them?
Well, those in their 20s and 30s that I most listen to are my children. And I think they grew up with a different mindset than I did. And I think they accept that as the way things should be. So I would say they take it in a positive way. Why is it?
I remember you told me a story. A friend of yours who's African-American lawyer, Luther Wright.
Right.
And what his experience was growing up a little
Yeah.
bit.
And he's not the only one, but yep. About driving while black.
Correct.
About just harassment.
And how many times he had been stopped.
How many times he's been stopped, and now
You recall?
he's
how many?
afraid. More than you can count on both hands. And now he's afraid. What about my son? What's going to happen with him if he's in the wrong place at the wrong time?
Or even in the right place
At the wrong
at the
time.
wrong time.
Yep.
I think he had an event that scared him a little bit with his son.
Yeah, I mean, I've got, my two sons are white. I don't have to worry if they do something knuckleheaded, which every male 16 to 20 is gonna do crazy stuff. And you put them in a car and they're gonna do something dumb. And I'm never worried about my boys getting shot by a policeman for speeding or for some minor traffic violation. But if they were African American, I'd be scared to death. Another change is, Oberfell, just, my kids accept that. That's the way things should be. That's the way they are. They've never seen anything else. And that's a good thing. But we need to embrace it and keep it.
Again, how do you feel the generations on the 20s and the 30s, they have grown up with this as the way it's going to be or the way it is? Do you think that's going to affect society going forward?
Well, some of that is in the hands of the Supreme Court. And you wonder and hope that some of the rights that our children have, you hope they're not taken away. There's some big cases there now, and there's some hints that that certain things that we all take for granted could be reversed. I've not polled. I just don't know how most 20 to 30-year-olds think, but when we were growing up, they're exposed to a completely different way of life and mindset than I was when I was growing up.
Let me switch to some of your observations about the cards, the changes in law firm administration, because how people who operate their law firms is also affected by some of these movements, some of the technology. What would you say have been the changes in the administration?
Yeah, I think a lot more people are working remotely now. That seems to be sort of the norm of some type of remote working environment. If not full-time, at least part-time. And I think law firms are more open to that now. I know I am. If somebody wants to work remotely, we need to accommodate that as long as they can get their work done. I think that's a big change, Carol.
How has the leadership and decision-making in the big firms changed?
Maybe you're asking the wrong person because I'm so far divorced from it. I think big firms are run by committees. At least that's been my exposure and experience. Yeah, but I'm the wrong person to ask that question.
How do you go about recruiting and hiring them?
That's tough. We've tried recruiters. We've tried ads. We've done LinkedIn. And I think most recently we've had some good success by putting out feelers on LinkedIn.
How do you get around reviewing all the resumes? I have heard that computers do an evaluation of a lot of resumes and spit out 2 or 3, which may or may not. But you see perhaps somebody who's really a bright star, but the resume just wasn't up to snuff.
That's tough. And you know, we're starting a new lawyer on Monday, a week from today, who's very well qualified, who I have great expectations and hopes for. And this is at the end of a long process that she's coming with us. And it's a lot of trial and error. And you know, I want somebody who's got good academic backgrounds, who's got good research skills, good people skills, who wants to do what I do. And that's a rare combination.
And how do you persuade that person to come and work for you?
I don't know. I guess I'm just lucky.
What would you say are the rewards and advantages of a legal career?
I view law as a profession. I view it as not, let's see how much money you can make, but as a true profession where you are serving society. In what I do, it's very rewarding to obtain a verdict or obtain a favorable settlement for somebody whose life's been devastated or who will be devastated if they don't get some relief. I like that. I like the law. I like studying it. I like its predictability or its supposed predictability. And sometimes you can try and change it. And, you know, I like stare decisis and precedent. I like studying the law. I like making legal arguments. I like the feeling of helping people. most of all, though. And I like working with people. I like working with other lawyers when they act professionally. I haven't always acted professionally. I've done some things I wish I hadn't done, but I try. But I like working with other lawyers when they do what they're supposed to do and they follow the rules and are worthy adversaries. There's nothing better.
What are the hardships and pitfalls of legal career?
The hours, the deadlines, the hours and the deadlines. It's hard.
Being away from the family.
Yeah.
Well, let me go back a little bit to your recollections of judges and lawyers. You said you only wanted to mention those who aren't with us anymore, but you gave me a list of 2 or 3, but you also mentioned a few who are still with us, including Bill
Akery in West Tennessee.
and Kip Gaden
Kip. Yep.
and Tommy Brothers.
Yep.
And one that isn't with us is L. Clore Morton.
Claude Morton and Tom Wiseman.
Tell me, as best you can, why you named these people.
Bill Akery is just a nice man. He is few words, rules decisively, rules fairly. It just seems like a good guy. I've been fortunate to have like 3 cases with him over in West Tennessee. Very, very knowledgeable, just a firm judge, good judge. Another judge who I didn't mention is David Wolf over in Dixon County. David Wolf's an excellent judge. He and I are the same age. I'm glad to hear he's running. He's another firm judge, no nonsense. Rules the way he thinks it ought to come out and doesn't really care much about what you think about it. But he's a good judge. Kip Gaden, just retired. I've always thought he's a good people judge. I've sometimes wondered about how he came to a conclusion or an opinion or a decision, but it's generally the right one. Tommy Brothers is no nonsense, just rules. I respect him, what he's been through. Just leave it at that. He's shown a lot of strength. Follows the law. That's all you want in a judge, is somebody who's going to be fair and follow the law and treat everybody equally. You don't want anybody who's going to be one-sided or not. Just somebody who's going to split it down the middle.
Now, most of these are state judges. There are 2 federal judges you mentioned.
Yep.
L. Clore Morton, who's not with
Right.
us, and Tommy Wiseman, who just recently
Yeah.
died. How would you describe those 2 gentlemen?
Well, Clore Morton was known as a terror when he was on the bench, and I think it was more because he wanted to keep his docket going. You know, so there was no delays, no nonsense at all. But he was he set up mostly in Cookville. A couple of cases I had before him, he was
Why
very
did he
fair.
set up in Cookville?
The story is that he ruled the wrong way in a desegregation case.
Actually, I think he ruled the right way.
He ruled the right way, but the people in Nashville, or some people in Nashville, didn't like the way he ruled. And so he said, screw it, I'm going to just stay up in Cookville.
He upheld the desegregation
That's right.
of public schools
That's right.
and became ostracized in the Nashville community. Is that what you're saying?
He did his job. He did his job.
So he set up in Cookville and he was trying to keep his docket moving.
Right. No nonsense.
What was he like as a trial judge?
I thought he was very good. I mean, he discouraged motions. You just didn't want to run afoul of it. But he treated you well if you were prepared, if you did what you were supposed to do. If you were straightforward with him, he was fine. He was fine. Tom Wiseman was the same way. Now, he had more of a temper. And fortunately, he never lost it with me. But he had a very high standard of say don't mislead me. Be straightforward with me. That would really tick him off. And I saw him get upset with some lawyers who weren't always forthright with him.
In your practice, did you find that lawyers on the other side would have a tendency to mislead you or misstate things?
No.
Not for the most part,
Not for the most part.
but it did happen.
I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen, and woe be unto you if the judge is Tom Wiseman or Clue Morton. I've seen Judge Wiseman just, I didn't want to even be in the room. It was so uncomfortable. But most lawyers, I think, try and do what's right.
Let's talk about some of the lawyers who stand out in your recollection. You mentioned Randy Kennard as one of them. I believe you said John Day was at the Boult firm when you started.
John's a good friend.
You mentioned a few others to me.
John's a great lawyer. Randy's a great lawyer. He's so effective.
How is that he is effective? What is it that he does?
He doesn't sweat the details. He doesn't sweat anything. He looks at things from a 20,000, 30,000 foot view and is just so effective and so personable. And just a nice guy. I think he comes across to juries.
But very prepared.
He is prepared. He is prepared. And he's got some really good people who work with him. And he's been very effective and very giving too, very generous to me and to other lawyers. If you ask him to help you, you don't even have to ask him to help you. If he knows you need some help, he'll be there. He's done some things that have just, for me, just very helpful in cases.
You mentioned John Day.
Yep. John and I practiced at Boult Cummings. Sam, John and I, we were all good friends. Both those guys are great lawyers.
Sam Lipshe.
Yes, Sam is. Sam doesn't do what John and I do, but John is an excellent lawyer, as is Sam.
You mentioned Bill Ramsey.
Bill, great guy. Talk about giving back. You know, he's been president of the Nashville Bar Association. He still edits the NBA Journal to this day. How many years has he been doing that? He does the Phil and Bill show, the seminar every year, and just a self-effacing, nice, humble guy who's a great lawyer. Bill's Ramsey.
And what is his area of practice?
He does criminal
White collar
and
crime?
civil. Yep. Maybe not all white collar crime, but criminal. Yeah, he does.
I mean, some of those criminals don't wear white collars.
They don't wear white collars.
What about Daryl Townsend?
Daryl's a good guy. He's been sort of a mentor. He's a little bit older than me, but he's been practicing law much longer than me. And I've always liked Daryl. You can trust him. He's okay.
How did you meet Gail Malone?
Gosh, years ago in the first malpractice case I did with John Connors. At the time, Gail was a defense lawyer, and he did all of Baptist Hospital's work, which is now St. Thomas Midtown. And he was their go-to guy.
And which is now Ascension.
Which is now Ascension, yeah. And he did, before they became Ascension, Gail did all their work, and we had several cases against them, and I had cases. It was a joy working with him. He was no BS, no hide the ball. You ask for something, he'll give it to you. he tells you something, it's accurate. And he's switched over. He's done a lot of plaintiff's work too. He's an excellent lawyer.
Tim Easter,
Yeah. Tim.
now a judge, but before, you mentioned him as a lawyer that you recalled it in a favorable way.
Oh, I do. I'll tell you, I shouldn't even tell this story. One of the judges back before things changed, they could ask lawyers to sit in for them to try a case. And that would happen from time to time. A judge would have a conflict and say, will you come, will you, Bill Leader, come and try this case? And so one of the circuit judges asked me to try a case for him, and it was a non-jury case. And Tim was representing his dad. And Woody Woodruff was representing the other side. And I'm the judge up there, not, just thinking, oh gosh, so I ruled, and not 6-7 years later, Tim's a judge down in Williamson County. And I'm thinking, he's going to hold that against me. And he didn't. To his credit, he treated me, he didn't. And he was representing, Tim was representing his dad, and I ruled against him. And lawyers shouldn't be put in that position to be a judge. They shouldn't. I mean, if you want to be a judge, then be a judge, and that's fine. But, you shouldn't switch that and be a judge one day and then be a lawyer every other day. But Tim never held that against me. I've had several cases in front of him, and I just thought he was a very fair, even-handed, well-reasoned judge. And I'm glad to see him on the court of appeals. I think he's an excellent judge and a good person too.
What trial strategies would you recommend to lawyers practicing in the courts today or in their office?
Know your case inside and out. Be yourself. You can pick up tips from other lawyers, but you got to be yourself. Be honest. Be sincere. And if you are passionate about your client, it will come through.
I think you had mentioned 2 tips. One was quit while you're ahead. What did you mean?
In cross-examining witnesses? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Or arguing to judges. Just know when to be quiet and sit down. That's a hard thing to do sometimes. You get a great answer, quit. If the judge is already on your side, be quiet. Don't use all your time. Just sit down.
What advice would you give regarding business practices today if a lawyer came to you?
Keep your overhead low. That's probably the best thing. Keep your overhead low. And this is a fine line, but it's okay to get out of your lane, but think about it before you do. I mean, sometimes you're better off associating somebody else or sending the case to somebody else. If you're not going to do what's necessary to represent your client, then don't get out of your lane.
Anything else?
And you've got so many notes. What did I write? Calendar things. Yeah, oh yeah, we always calendar things. Everything gets calendar.
And then above it.
Respect.
Those seem to be some of the themes that you have mentioned throughout the people that you had to mentor you, the lawyers that you
I'm not by any means perfect, Carol. And I've learned so much by my mistakes. But we have to treat people with respect and see where they're coming from. Just because they're on the other side or they disagree with us doesn't mean they're wrong. And we've got to keep that in the back of our mind. We might not be right about everything. Just treat people with respect.
What business practices do you have that you feel would benefit somebody if you were telling them to start their own firm? Business practices that you've instituted?
Keep your overhead low. Get a mentor if you don't have one. If you don't have one, reach out to somebody. People are flattered if you ask them for their opinion. Just go talk to anybody. Call them up on the phone and say, hey, I've got this question. I need this advice. I don't think people mind that at all.
What do you tell your staff about calls if you're not available?
Take a message. Tell them I'll call them. When's the best time to call them back? If you can help them, do it. But my goal is to call somebody back within a couple of hours, if not sooner, and let them know. He's out. He's expecting your call. If I'm expecting somebody's call, I'll let everybody know. Hey, I'm expecting a call from Judge McCoy. And well, it goes without saying, if a judge calls you, you better take it and respond. But I'm expecting a call from Carol McCoy, and if she calls, tell her I'm out. I'll be back at 2, and I'll call her back.
What counseling strategies would you give?
Counseling. Oh, easy. Listen. I mean, really listen. And just make sure you understand somebody. Don't assume you know what their story is. Listen.
What about alternatives that you pose to them? How do you do that? Either to an expert witness, your client, whether it's a layperson or a professional. What do you do then?
You mean alternatives?
Outcomes, either outcomes on the end of the lawsuit or outcomes in the courtroom.
Well, when somebody comes to me, I talked to a mom this morning whose son died after a surgery. And she's upset. I talked to both she and her husband, and we just had the case reviewed, and it seems like it has merit. And I asked her, I said, what is it that you would like to have happen? And her answer was, I don't want this to ever happen to anybody again. And I said, well, maybe if we take this case and go forward with it and are successful, this doctor or this hospital may change this one practice about what they did. It was more systems failure than it was just somebody not doing something appropriately. But I can't guarantee that. But if we, what we primarily do is ask for money. But I can tell you that sometimes there's been changes in healthcare providers, hopefully in other defendants that we've brought claims against, where they changed their practice because they realized what they did was either hurting people or was costing them a lot of money or both. But it's good to know that from the client. What is it you want? And I always ask a potential client, what do you want out of this? Where do you want to be at the end? Because they don't understand all that goes into a lawsuit. Nobody can understand it.
When you have a client that says that to you, what is the potential to make that part of the resolution? You're not going to get it in court. A judge is not going to say, defendant, you have to change your practice. So have you found that it's possible to go to the attorney for the other side and have an implementation of something that is satisfactory to your client? That's not dollars. That is something that they would find in keeping with what they want.
We have seen, I can say, several instances where hospitals have changed what they've done, I presume because of what led to an injury to a client of ours. Either they come up with new policies to avoid that from happening again, or change their procedures, rewritten the way they've done things. That's not happened very often. That's not been a very common occurrence, but I can name 3 or 4 instances just off the top of my head where I think that has happened, and 2 where I know it's happened.
In the news just this weekend, there was a conviction of a nurse who administered the wrong medication to a patient, and as a result, the patient died. There is some concern, I think, in the nursing community that this will have a serious impact on nurses wanting to be in that same position.
Mhm.
The individual admitted that she made a mistake. There wasn't any intent. A lot of the elements that the criminal law requires, it was negligent, of course, and we have this overlap of civil negligence and then criminal negligence. How is that action, prosecuting somebody who's lost their license, has admitted that they made a mistake, is very sorry that this happened, but we have put a lot of pressure on our healthcare system with COVID. We're short-staffed, people are working long hours. What impact do you think that will have on the medical profession?
I know it's scared and concerns the nursing community. I know that from talking to nurses. And they're thinking this is unprecedented. I don't know the facts about what happened at the hospital. Very few people do, I presume. On the face of it, I was somewhat surprised that she was prosecuted criminally. She didn't come out and say what she had done. She was working over the 24th, the 25th, and the 26th of December. I'm sure that they didn't have the A-team there in the hospital. And she was a help-all person. I don't know enough about the facts, but I know that professionals are concerned about it. I don't, one of the things that I've tried, I don't know enough about the case to comment on it. I did watch a good bit of it, and I found it very interesting.
Who were the lawyers?
Well, the 3 assistant DAs who were prosecuting it. I did not know any of the 3. The guy at Peter Strand's at Tunintrica was the defense lawyer.
He's excellent.
I thought he was very good. And I thought he did a good job of cross-examining witnesses, many of whom were from Vanderbilt. He called a Vanderbilt witness, and there were other Vanderbilt witnesses on the prosecution side. I thought he did an excellent job. They didn't call the nurse as a witness. I feel bad for her. I mean, I said to my wife this weekend, is she in jail now? And I presume she is. because she was found guilty. I feel very bad for her. She came forward. She made a bad mistake, but we've seen those before, and they never rose to criminal liability.
I was wondering if in your entire practice, you'd ever had anybody criminally charged for a medical mistake, because that's where medical malpractice comes from. Are the mistakes that are made when a medical professional errs.
I've never known anybody to be criminally prosecuted. But in those cases, yeah.
I'm getting to the end of the questions that I want to ask you, but one of them is, what major contributions to society or legal history do you feel you've made or have happened during your lifetime?
Have happened during my lifetime.
Well, it's primarily aimed at what you've done.
Oh, I have to be honest. I don't. I hope that I have helped my clients. I hope that I have helped young babies or kids who've been horribly injured have at least the resources to get what they need. I hope I've relieved parents' concerns about that. I've offended people, and I'm sorry for that when it's been my fault. I would like to be the best lawyer I can be. I'm skirting your question, Carol. I think so many other lawyers have done so much more than I have.
You're being unduly humble.
Um,
I think you have had a few appellate decisions that have probably helped change the law in a good way.
I hope so.
What do
hope
you
so.
see as the role of today's lawyer and law firms in the future?
Well, I think what I do is harder than it used to be. I think there's less lawyers doing what I do. I think we ought to do what we can to encourage trials. I think we should do what we can to encourage trial skills. I think we should try more cases. I've loved being a lawyer, and it's been good to me. Many people, many judges, many older lawyers have tolerated me, put up with me, and helped me along, and have not jumped down my throat when I've done something stupid or offensive. And I've tried to remember that. I've got a lot to give back. And I enjoy talking to younger lawyers. If any younger lawyer calls me, I'm always happy to talk with them and help them along, help in any way I can.
What are your current activities?
Besides my work, I spend what time I can with my wonderful wife and children, who I don't get to see enough, my children anyway. I swim every day. It's one of the best things I do.
You've been swimming since you were in high
Since
school.
even before then, yeah. Swimming and running, but I can't run anymore, so I swim.
How often do you swim?
6
Every
days-
day? 6 days a week?
Yeah.
What projects have you yet to accomplish?
Well, I'd like to take a long vacation with Melanie. Many long vacations with her. She deserves it.
Would you
Um,
consider teaching?
I don't know if anybody want me to teach anything. I have a law partner who went into teaching, and he loved it. He was in
Ken
high
King?
school. Yes, who was one of the best lawyers I ever know.
And do you you think that you couldn't do the same and enjoy it?
Well, I'm not in a position right now where I could. I think it would be a wonderful opportunity to give back. And I think it would be a lot of work. And I think it would be very fulfilling to be a teacher. Watching what it did for my mom. My mom's done more good than I'll ever do. She taught those kids and they love her. When she had her funeral, it was just unbelievable, the outpouring for that lady. And the letters and the notes from the students and the children of students and the grandchildren of students.
Teachers have a big impact on you.
They do. And Ken King, he's a great lawyer. And he was a mentor and a role model in Boult Cummings. And he's a good man.
What are the plans you have for retirement?
I don't have any. I don't have any plans for retirement. I don't want to overextend my stay, Carol, but I have no plans.
Let me ask you one final question, and that is, what question did I not ask you that you wish I had asked?
What do you think of me as a judge? I think you were an excellent judge.
I think this is buttering up the questionnaire. The
No, it's
questioner.
one last question. I think you were an excellent judge. I think you always treated people with respect and even-handed.
Wasn't looking for that to be the last
I know you
question.
weren't.
And I think that was very crafty of you, which is not a bad skill to have as a very good trial lawyer. So we will conclude this and we'll just be quiet from here